Hey, thanks for watching this video or clicking on this video. We're going to talk about wage and hour issues today, and I've got with me Andrew Singer, who's the managing partner of Tannenbaum Helpern Syracuse and Hirschritt. He's also chair of their employment practice group at the firm. And we're going to just jump right into this really kind of disturbing, explosive area of insurance claims and lawsuits regarding employees around wage and hour. So, Andrew, welcome first. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Gordon.
Yeah. So can you tell us what are wage and hour claims and lawsuits? How do they arise? What are they and what's going on?
Sure. So there's a number of wage and hour laws, federal, state, and local, New York City, etc., that employers are required to follow, whether it's paying minimum wage. If you're in the hospitality industry, how do you pay tipped employees? Classifying employees as exempt or non-exempt from overtime and paying overtime properly. The other than you don't want to violate the law, these laws, the penalties are severe and in some cases extreme and irrational. And I'll give some examples. Prior to the pandemic, wage and hour lawsuits, wage and hour class action lawsuits were very common. We defended them regularly. We also helped our clients be wage and hour compliant. They went dormant really during the pandemic. I'm not exactly sure why. However, in the last 3-4 months, wage and hour lawsuits have come back with a vengeance. They are many of these types of lawsuits are filed every single day, and the penalties are severe. And just to kind of tie in insurance, if you violate wage and hour laws, you are almost 100% certain to not be covered by your any insurance policy. The one thing, though, that I would recommend is some policies do cover the defense costs.
Right.
So that is very important. And I would make sure that you have that kind of coverage because the defense costs can be tremendous.
Right. And defense is really limited in a lot of these policies to, it's capped to 100,000 or 50,000 or 200,000. And it may not be available for every employer, but certainly you're right. If you have employment practice liability insurance, make sure it's endorsed to include wage and hour coverage. Talk to your insurance broker about that. So, Andrew, can you give us some examples of what the numbers look like and the types of claims you're seeing?
So historically, the most common wage and hour lawsuit was failure to pay overtime properly, right? Over 40 hours a week, non-exempt employees must be paid overtime, time and a half. Different ways of calculating that depending on how the employee is compensated. The reason that the penalties are so expensive and extreme are based on the fact that there's 100% liquidated damages, meaning for every dollar you didn't pay correctly, there's an equal amount of money that's the penalty. In addition, you pay that employee's legal fees. So here's the problem with it. You're an employer, you get a demand letter from a lawyer. You have 20, 30, 40 employees in a certain situation. They represent one right now. They say, this person is owed $100,000 in overtime, plus the penalties, plus legal fees. We'll settle now for $250,000. Just for that one person. That person's been with you, let's say 5 or 6 years. You're like, oh my God, that's one, crazy number. And two, that's not correct. They're alleging overtime every single week for 6 years. And I know there were weeks they didn't work overtime. And I'll go through this with the client and they'll give me proof. Hopefully you have documentation of the hours. And I may do that analysis with the client and say, I think you owe $12,000 in overtime. Here's the problem. If we litigate it, you're paying your lawyer, you're paying their lawyer, and ultimately we know we're going to lose, right? Winning doesn't mean they demanded 100 and you won because it's only 12. You lose if they find $1 in unpaid wages. You're paying both sets of lawyers through jury verdict. That in and of itself can be hundreds of thousands of dollars theoretically, particularly in a class action sense. And so that is where the numbers get crazy. And you can go back 6 years under New York state law and 2 or 3 years, depending on circumstances, under federal law. So that's where the numbers get really high, requiring early settlements for meaningful money. What's now even worse is there are laws that, for whatever reason, companies have been paying their employees, let's say, twice a month, every other week. That sounds normal. Like everyone does that. There are certain industries and types of employees where you have to pay them weekly. So I think Walmart right now is getting hammered, and they're trying to fight back, where they could, millions and millions and millions of dollars, because they were not paying weekly to certain classes of their employees. So this is how that works. If you think about it, someone's worked for you for 3 years. You've paid them every other week, and you've paid them perfectly correctly under all laws the amount. So 3 years later, they've made everything they're supposed to make. You just didn't pay them weekly. Well, the way the law works is every day you're late, you didn't pay them. So the penalty, like literally, let's say over those 3 years, it's $150,000 in wages. You could theoretically owe 300 grand, even though they've gotten paid everything they were supposed to.
Crazy.
So that the plaintiff's lawyers have picked up on that, and they're now, I'm actually defending one right now for a company, an electric subcontractor, and we violated the law. We know we did. The only good news in that situation is someone brought it to their attention about 1.5 years ago, and they've cured it, right? So, there's a window where every day that you comply is a day that 6 years comes 5 years and 364 days, and it reduces your damages. So and listen, there are special rules. There's a hospitality wage and hour order. There's special ways of paying building employees. There's benefits, like superintendents have to be paid in a certain way. So the laws are very complex and very, very dangerous from a damage standpoint. And that's what's going on now. It was dormant for about 2-3 years. As I said, back with a vengeance. It is critically important that every employer understand how they're paying their employees, whether they're paying them properly, classifying them as exempt or not exempt from overtime properly, making sure they're paying them correctly, whether it's twice a month, every other week, or weekly, and making sure that you're fully compliant with all wage and hour laws, because the penalties far outweigh the real damages. Clearly, the laws are meant to overburden the employer, put the penalty on the employer to be so severe, and that's just the way our system works.
Are you seeing any particular industries affected more so than others in the wage and hour?
Sure. So, typical like law firms, accounting firms, insurance brokerage firms, they're not likely to pay improperly, right? It's more the hourly worker, right? Okay. Where there's a lot of overtime. Those are the typical industries, so construction, general contracting, hospitality, warehouse manufacturers. Those are more likely to have issues. Okay.
And as you said, like there's a limited recovery ability just for defense on insurance. I would imagine a lot of business owners are thinking, well, my bookkeeper knows all this, or my payroll company knows all about this. And we've discussed this previously. Relying on third parties like your payroll company may not be the smartest thing. So how does an employer create like a bulletproof defense?
I mean, in a self-serving way, you just need a good employment lawyer truly who knows the wage and hour laws inside and out and can go through a wage and hour audit with you and your HR team or your bookkeeper or your CFO. And you cannot rely. I just very recently had a client uses, I won't name the name, but one of the largest, most well-known payroll companies. And they're like, they must know. And it's funny, I have a friend at that company. And I mentioned this to him and he said, no, there's all different levels of service. Yes, at the highest level of service, 100% they're compliant. At the lower levels, he even himself said, not necessarily true.
Yeah.
So you really
Does that
have
sound like you get what you pay for?
a little bit.
And it is a little self-serving to kind of say you need an employment lawyer, but the one thing that I want to kind of highlight that you said is you go through an audit. You have an audit process to make sure you're compliant, and if you're not, you're fixing it like right away so that you are compliant.
And I will tell you, it's not an expensive process really.
Okay.
To describe, here are our payroll practices. Here's what we do. You know, it's well worth it to make sure that you're buttoned up. And if you're not, well, what's my exposure? How do I fix it? Those are not necessarily easy questions, but at least you know what your potential exposure is, and then have an opportunity to fix it.
Yeah,
I think your eyes open.
Better to be safe than sorry, to use another
Yeah.
old expression.
Yeah, because the sorry is incredibly expensive and doesn't match. That example, you owe $10,000 to $12,000 in overtime. The demand is $250,000. I would tell you that a settlement of like 80, 90, 100 grand isn't a bad settlement without having to litigate and spend money on legal fees. And, it's not necessarily, a bad economic decision. May not feel good. And that individual employee might be getting a bit of a windfall, but the exposure is tremendous.
Great. I think we covered the topic in a nutshell. Any final thoughts you want to kick in on that?
No. I think we covered everything. I just can't emphasize enough. The plaintiffs' lawyers are out there. They're combing the streets for clients. It's easy money. They find anyone who there's one minor issue with payroll practices, and you're going to get hit. It's just a matter of when, not if. And
it's easy for the plaintiffs' attorneys to just kind of crank out these lawsuits because they've done them once. They don't have to do a lot of work to.
No, there are law firms that just do this. They do nothing else.
Copy and paste, and
that's right.
You're on the receiving end of some bad news.
And the employee doesn't pay hourly. The lawyer gets paid from the recovery.
Yeah, so he's in it for the big win.
Yeah, and it doesn't cost the employee anything.
Right. So a very bleak picture. Thank you for painting that one for us, Andrew.
Sorry about that.
If anybody wanted to get in touch with you, how's the best way to reach you?
Either phone or email. Email probably the best. It's my last name, Singer, SINGER @THSH.com, TomHarrySamHarry.com.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. And I'll put your contact info in the show notes for anybody that's watching this video. Appreciate the information. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thanks, Gordon. Appreciate the opportunity.